All right, chapter talk for chapter 7. Two simple but very important learning objectives out of chapter 7. Number 1, understand the strategies of business communication when conveying negative news. Up until this point, we have focused primarily on a direct strategy, or BIF, big idea first. Now we're going to examine BIL, big idea a little later, which is an indirect strategy which understands the sensitivities and the emotions surrounding bad news. So that's our first objective. Second, then, compose indirect messages to convey bad news. So we're going to talk about the strategy, and then we're going to get specific. How do we send negative news appropriately? Okay, so let's just clarify. We use an indirect strategy when we have to send bad news. Again, the acronym we use is BILL, B-I-L-L, big idea a little later. Now note that that bill is just a little bit later. Our goal is to prepare the reader for the bad news and hopefully explain with logic and reasoning why the bad news is what it is, okay? So again, we use an indirect strategy when we know that the reader is going to be frustrated, upset, inconvenienced. Okay, so when specifically do we want to be indirect or use BIL in the workplace? When the bad news is personally upsetting. If we understand that our words are going to have a negative impact on someone, if it's going to upset them, we use BIL. This might be a promotion that was not received, earning compensation that was reduced, a reduction in force, changes to your current role. When we know it'll be personally upsetting, we want to use an indirect strategy. When the bad news will provoke a hostile reaction. Woo, that's a heavy word there. This is straight from your text. But if we know that our reader is potentially going to be upset or irritated or angry, we want to diffuse and hopefully soothe. Third reason, when the bad news threatens the customer relationship. Okay, that is always central to our strategy in business communication. We want to ensure, maintain, and support positive relationship. So using an indirect strategy, we always keep in mind we're trying to maintain and foster strong relationships. And then lastly, when the bad news is unexpected. Okay, this might not be something wildly important, but if it comes out of the blue, we need to amply prepare the reader for the news. So we use an indirect message, again, BIL, when the bad news is personally upsetting, if it will provoke a hostile reaction, if it threatens the customer relationship, or if it's just simply unexpected. Okay, so let us review BIL. This was mentioned in prior chapters, but this week our focus is BIL, the indirect strategy. Big idea a little later. Now note I said a little bit later. We are not going to be insensitive to the point where we're avoiding, because we all know when bad news is coming our way that only frustrates the reader more so. But we just provide the info a little bit later, okay? We use this to relay bad news and most importantly cause minimal upset. And I underscore minimal there because we are all human. And when we receive bad news, it is upsetting. So this strategy is not perfect. It's not flawless, but it is with the intent of causing minimal upset. And most importantly, it is based off logic and reasoning. Psychology tells us that as human beings, we can accept, understand, and move forward when we receive bad news if it makes sense, if it's logical, if it's been explained to us. So this strategy centers on that. We want to give them reasoning as to why the bad news is what it is. And then lastly, the strategy aims at restoring or rebuilding goodwill. Again, keeping that customer relationship in mind. Okay, so the indirect strategy, BIL. When we send an indirect message, we have the same three components. We have open, body, close. Now, I will give you a sample indirect message in a moment here, but let's first identify what each of these pieces are. The opening is a neutral buffer. Now, if we remember back in using a BIF or a direct strategy, we instantly state our main point. In an indirect strategy, we do not do that. We prepare the reader for the subject matter, but it remains neutral. We're not indicating yes or no. Then in the body, we explain the bad news with logic and reasoning, and of course, courtesy, before disclosing it. Now, the hope is that we're able to do this with brevity. So in 2 to 3 sentences, we can help that reader understand the logic. So by the time they get to the bad news, it makes sense to them. And then thirdly is the close. And in the close, we want to repair goodwill once again. And to me, most importantly, tell the reader what can be done. Now, I share this often, but if I tell my kids no, their first question is why? And maybe the question is, today the question of the day actually is, can we go to Wildwater West? No, we cannot. Well, why, Mom? Because Mom has to work and I can't drive you there. So then the subsequent question is, well, when, right? Now, this Wildwater West example is based off of children's psychology, but as adults, we're no different. If we're told no, we want to know why. And if it isn't today, then when or how, right? So we use open, body, close, same structure. Again, opening is neutral buffer. Body is explanation, the logic before we share the bad news. And then the close is repairing or restoring goodwill and explaining to the reader what we can do. What other options are available? What alternate choices does this person have? Because again, when we're reading a document, the only thing we care about is what's in it for me. So the indirect strategy embraces that. Okay, so let's look at a sample. Build, big idea a little later. So we have our greeting, hello Sam. Once again, it's semi-professional, courteous, simple. Now we go to our opening line, our neutral buffer. I wanted to follow up regarding your interview for the director position. Now note, this doesn't say you got the position or you didn't. It's simply indicating the subject matter. That is why it is a neutral buffer. Now let's move to the body, okay? Again, our body is where we explain with logic and reasoning before relaying the bad news. First, let me say you did an excellent job. I was impressed with your attitude, coachability, and leadership potential. We interviewed 6 candidates for the position. 1 individual held leadership experience in industry and came highly recommended. For this reason, the job was offered to an alternate candidate as their skill sets best fit the role. Okay, so note the reasoning that was supplied. Okay, first it was courteous. It was applauding the reader for the good things they are doing. Then secondly, we explained the scenario. There were 6 candidates who interviewed. 1 had leadership experience in industry. And then the last sentence within that is where we actually supplied the bad news. For this reason, the job was offered to an alternate candidate. So the intent of the body, again, is to explain with logic and reasoning prior to giving them the bad news. So hopefully they have some understanding that we've emotionally prepared them for it and supplied logic as to why the answer wasn't what they had hoped for. Now let's examine the close, okay? Once again in the close, we look to restore goodwill and let the reader know what can be done. Okay, so let's examine this. Close. I strongly encourage you to apply for the open positions of shift supervisor and team lead. This would be a strong fit for you and offer the leadership experience to potentially move you into a director role. Please let me know if interested. I would be glad to expedite your application. We value you and want to find the best fit to help achieve your career goals. Okay. Respectfully, Bill, CEO of Indirect Messages. All right, so let's examine the close. Now note, again, there is layers of support and courtesy within this throughout Bill. So we're recognizing to the reader, like, we understand you don't want to feel this way, so you're emotionally buffering as well. So in the close, we're offering alternatives. Hey, here's 2 other roles that I think would be a great fit. I'd even go as far as expediting your application. This could further your career path. And then again, we have restorative comments. We value you. We want to find the best fit. Okay. So Bill, big idea a little later. We use it to convey negative news. We have our opening, the neutral buffer. the body, the logic, and reasoning before the bad news. And then lastly, we have our close, which restores goodwill and offers alternatives. Okay, so the other thing we need to remember as we are using the indirect strategy. Now this is resurfacing. We've worked on this prior in the term. Choosing positive words. When we are sending negative news, we have to give somebody news they do not want. So the stimuli of a negative word versus a positive word can greatly alter the emotional component of that. So whenever possible, we want to take away negative words and replace them with positive, and then state what can be done. So let's examine a scenario here. Okay, here's a negative example. I cannot have the report done by tomorrow morning. Okay, so this isn't wildly negative, but the word that should jump out at you is I cannot. I cannot. I will not be able to. Unfortunately, we could have really jazzed this up. Let's say it read, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, I regretfully cannot have the report done. Now, within that sample sentence, there is 3 to 4 words that conjure up a negative stimuli. So instead of reiterating the negative, let's remove that and insert the positive. So let's flip that around. Positive example. I will have the report completed by 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, 11/9/21. Okay, so here's the good news. It can't be done tomorrow, but I'll have it done by Wednesday. So we simply took out the cannot, and we said I will. And then we time-stamped it. We told the reader what can be done. If not tomorrow, when? We answered that, 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday. So choosing positive words, again, it's about removing negative stimuli, but almost more importantly, telling the reader what can be done. Because again, if the answer is no, we want to know why. And if not now, when or how. Okay, so that is chapter 7, 2 simple learning objectives. Understand the strategies of business communication when conveying bad news. That's where we talked about the psychology, using Bill, big idea a little later. And when it's appropriate to use Bill, when we know the information is upsetting or it's going to catch somebody off guard, or we need to promote future business. All of those reasons are valid to use Bill. And then our final objective, compose indirect messages to convey bad news. Again, open our neutral buffer, body, explanation, and reason before the bad news, and then close, restore goodwill, and tell the reader what can be done. Thank you.